All right, so get ready because today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of Alvin Johnson.
Alvin Johnson.
He was a serial killer,
Yes,
and his story is just really disturbing and just fascinating to me.
absolutely.
And a lot of people probably have never even heard of him,
That's right.
but we've got some information here from his Wikipedia page,
Okay.
and we're going to kind of go through that and see what we can find out about him. And what really stood out to me is that his crimes span 3 states.
Yes.
And at one point, he even teamed up with another serial killer.
Yeah, the scope of his crimes and the fact that he collaborated with another individual makes this a truly compelling case. I think by examining the specifics of his life, we can gain insights into the factors that might have contributed to his path and also the responses of the criminal justice system.
Okay, so let's go all the way back to the beginning.
Right.
Alvin Johnson was born in 1941 in Smithville, Texas,
Okay.
one of 14 children
Wow.
in a family of tenant farmers.
So a very large family
Yeah, a huge family.
and struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah. And I mean, that just in itself, I can't even imagine
Right.
raising 14 kids
Right.
under any circumstances, let alone being tenant farmers.
Absolutely.
But it makes you wonder if that environment played a role.
It's certainly a factor worth considering, especially when you look at the broader context of his life. Now, there's also an incident from his childhood that's particularly disturbing and may have had a lasting impact on him. According to the sources, Johnson was accidentally struck in the head with an axe handle when he was a child.
An axe handle.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's pretty significant.
I can't imagine the damage that could do to a young child's brain.
Right. And according to what we know, this injury led to some serious consequences for him, including amnesia, dizziness, and he may have even exhibited symptoms of schizophrenia. Traumatic brain injuries, especially during childhood when the brain is still developing, they can really disrupt that development and potentially contribute to behavioral issues later on in life.
So you're saying that as horrible as that was, it might have put him on a path toward violence.
It's impossible to say for certain, of course, but it definitely raises questions. As he got older, he started drifting from place to place, taking on labor jobs, working on farms across the country. This kind of transient lifestyle probably further isolated him and made it even harder to form those stable connections that people need.
Yeah, it's like he was already kind of lost in a way, even before the crimes.
Yeah.
So then in 1972, that's when we encountered the first murder linked to Johnson,
Okay.
the killing of Roger Geller in Klamath Falls, Oregon.
Right. So Geller was a cook who was actually in the process of planning a move back to Nebraska.
Oh, wow.
And Johnson, he broke into Geller's hotel room, beat him quite badly, strangled him, stole his money, and fled the scene. It's a crime that shows a level of impulsive violence and, unfortunately, opportunity.
That's just awful. You'd think that with a crime that brutal, he would gotten a much harsher sentence.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
But he was convicted of manslaughter, not murder,
Right.
and only received 10 years.
Yeah, that's one of the more puzzling aspects of this case.
Yeah.
To fully understand this seemingly lenient sentence, we have to consider, consider the legal landscape at the time.
Yeah.
And societal attitudes as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't uncommon for crimes like this, involving sudden acts of violence, to be classified as manslaughter, especially if there were mitigating factors involved.
So even though he took a life, they might see it as a crime of passion or some kind of reaction to some kind of provocation.
Exactly. And unfortunately, the sources we have don't give us the detailed legal records from the case.
Oh,
So we can only speculate about the specific reasons behind that manslaughter conviction. What we do know is that the sentence, those 10 years, while it's substantial, it does seem remarkably light,
yeah.
considering the loss of life.
Especially knowing what we know about what happens later.
Right.
So he didn't stay put in prison either.
Uh-huh.
He tried to escape with another inmate,
Really?
Wilfred Dean Hill.
Okay.
I mean, just talk about a need for freedom.
Well, this escape attempt really speaks volumes, I think,
Mhm.
about Johnson's character and his willingness to use violence to get what he wanted. They overpowered a guard,
Oh, wow.
armed themselves with knives from the prison kitchen, stole a patrol car. Johnson was even shot during this escape.
Wow.
It was a bold move.
So we're not talking about some guy who just passively accepts his fate. He's willing to fight, to risk everything
Absolutely.
for freedom. And this is all before he even served his full sentence for the first murder, right?
That's right. He was recaptured a few hours later, but the incident highlights just how dangerous he was.
Yeah.
And it kind of reinforces this idea that maybe that earlier head injury played a role in his behavior,
Right.
that impulsive aggression, the lack of rational thinking. It aligns with what we know about traumatic brain injuries.
So after all that, Johnson finally is released in 1983,
Okay.
and he ends up at a rescue mission in Fresno, California.
A rescue mission.
And this is where he crosses paths with another serial killer,
Oh, no.
Wilbur Lee Jennings, who primarily targeted prostitutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a chilling thought that serial killers often operate within specific social circles,
Yeah.
often preying on the vulnerable populations.
Yeah.
And it seems like in this case, their paths tragically converged. And what's even more disturbing is that they actually formed a partnership.
They teamed up.
Yes, their motives aligning in this really twisted way.
Mm-hmm.
And their first documented crime as a pair was just horrific. The rape and murder of 76-year-old Clarice Reinke in Easton.
Oh, my goodness.
The level of violence involved was extreme, and this particular case went unsolved for years because neither Johnson nor Jennings were considered suspects initially.
So they got away with it for a long time.
They did,
Yeah.
and it really speaks to the challenges of solving cold cases, especially when you're dealing with perpetrators who manage to evade detection early on.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that justice is sometimes delayed, and the process of uncovering the truth can be incredibly complex. Now, as technology has advanced, especially in DNA analysis, law enforcement has gained these incredible new tools to revisit those cold cases. And that's what happened here.
It's amazing how DNA technology has really revolutionized criminal investigations. It makes you wonder how many more cold cases are just waiting for that one breakthrough. It's incredible, how DNA technology has really revolutionized criminal investigations. It makes you wonder how many more cold cases are just waiting for that one breakthrough. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another one of Johnson's crimes.
Okay.
The kidnapping and murder of James Clark in Salt Lake City, Utah, back in August of '83.
This case is truly horrifying, because it involved the torture and sexual assault of both Jones and his wife, Ann Lee Clark. They were visiting from Texas.
Oh, wow.
And Johnson held them hostage in a warehouse and subjected them to this just awful ordeal.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to even fathom what they went through. Can you go into a little more detail about what happened to the Clarks?
Well, according to the sources,
Yep.
Johnson, he forced James to undress, tied him up, and then beat him unconscious with a shovel handle.
Oh my God.
And then he forced Anne to participate in the beating
Oh.
before sexually assaulting her. It's a level of cruelty and depravity that's just almost beyond comprehension.
It's just monstrous to think that someone could inflict that kind of pain and humiliation on another human being. It's truly horrifying.
Yet what's really disturbing about this case is the level of premeditation.
Yeah.
Johnson didn't just snap. He planned and executed this attack with this chilling sense of purpose,
Yeah.
a clear indication of his dangerousness and his complete disregard for human life.
Did both of the Clarks survive this?
Sadly, no. Johnson eventually beat James to death with that same shovel handle. But in the midst of this horror, there's a glimmer of hope. Anne, thankfully, managed to escape.
Oh, wow.
While Johnson was unconscious, she immediately reported the crime to the police,
Oh, good.
providing crucial details that led to his capture.
It's amazing how even in the face of such trauma, she had the strength to get away and make sure that justice was served.
It's incredible.
Where did they catch him? Did he try to run?
But he didn't make it very far. He was arrested the very next day aboard a freight train in Lincoln, Nebraska. As you might expect, he tried to fight extradition back to Utah to delay the legal process.
So it sounds like he was trying everything he could to avoid facing the consequences, but in the end, he couldn't escape accountability. Did they hold a trial for the murder of James Clark?
Yes, he was extradited back to Utah, where he stood trial for the murder of James Clark and the kidnapping and assault of Anne. The prosecution presented a very strong case. They detailed the horrific nature of the crimes and the overwhelming evidence against him.
So what was the verdict? Did the jury find him guilty?
They did. They found him guilty on all counts. But during the sentencing phase, Johnson's defense team, they presented some mitigating factors.
Okay.
They argued that he had an intellectual disability and suffered from chronic alcoholism,
Right.
both of which could have influenced his actions and impaired his judgment.
I've always wondered about how those kinds of factors are weighed in court.
Yeah.
It must be a really tough job for that jury to balance the severity of the crime with the defendant's mental state and struggles.
It's a complex issue, no doubt. The court had to consider criminal responsibility. To what extent was Johnson in control of his actions, given those intellectual limitations and his history of substance abuse?
Right.
These are questions that continue to challenge our legal system,
Hmm.
as we try to find a balance between accountability and compassion.
Yeah. So how did the court ultimately rule in Johnson's case? What was the sentence?
The jury, after careful deliberation, decided to sentence him to 2 life sentences, but with the possibility of parole. So it seems that they recognized those mitigating factors,
Okay.
but still felt the need to hold him accountable for his actions.
2 life sentences, that's a harsh punishment, but you could argue it reflects the gravity of his actions.
Right.
What I find really interesting is the possibility of parole. It suggests that maybe the court thought there was a chance for rehabilitation despite the severity of his crime.
Yeah, that's a good point. This type of sentencing reflects a societal shift towards considering the individual circumstances of each case, particularly when mental health and addiction are involved.
Okay.
The idea that even in cases of extreme violence, there's a possibility for redemption,
Right.
a chance for the offender to address their underlying issues and eventually reintegrate into society.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But let's jump ahead a few years. Remember that cold case we talked about, the murder of Clarice Ranke?
Yeah.
Well, hold on to your hats because the story takes another unexpected turn.
Boom.
In 2008, just a year before Johnson was scheduled for a parole hearing, DNA evidence linked both him and his former partner in crime, Wilbur Lee Jennings, to the Ranke murder scene.
Oh.
You have to wonder if the timing was coincidental or if investigators had a hunch and were looking for a connection between Johnson and the Ranke case.
Right.
Either way, it's a perfect example of how scientific advancements can really change the course of justice even decades after a crime has been committed.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the dedication of law enforcement professionals and forensic scientists
Yeah.
who never give up on seeking the truth.
Right.
They were able to use this new DNA evidence and connect it back to a crime that had been unsolved for years.
Yeah.
And that brings some closure to the victim's family
Yeah.
and holds those responsible accountable for their actions.
It's incredible how one piece of evidence can completely change the narrative. But with both Johnson and Jennings now linked to the Rankin murder, did they stand trial for this crime? It seems like with this DNA evidence, it would be pretty open and shut case.
Yeah.
But you said that neither of them stood trial for the Rankin murder.
Right. Well, that's where the case takes another turn. By the time this DNA evidence comes to light, Jennings had already passed away in 2014.
Oh, wow.
And Johnson was already serving those 2 life sentences
Right.
for the Clark case.
Yeah.
So it seems the authorities just decided not to pursue further prosecution.
So even though they had this, irrefutable proof
Mm.
of his involvement in the Rankin murder, they just let it go. I guess, from a practical standpoint, he was already behind bars for life. But it still feels a little anticlimactic, like justice wasn't fully served.
It definitely raises questions about the purpose of prosecution in these types of cases. When the perpetrator's already serving life, is it about punishment? Is it about closure? Or is there a point where further legal action becomes redundant?
Right.
It's a complex ethical and legal dilemma.
It makes you think about the whole idea of justice and what it means for the victims and their families.
Yeah.
Is a life sentence enough? Or is there a need for something more than that?
Right.
A symbolic, recognition of each crime.
Yeah. Those are questions society is still grappling with. There's no easy answer. Each case has unique circumstances, and the pursuit of justice often involves these difficult trade-offs. But in Johnson's case, that lack of a trial for the Reinke murder does leave a lingering sense of unfinished business,
Right.
a feeling that the full weight of his actions wasn't totally acknowledged.
It's definitely a thought-provoking twist in an already complicated story. But wait, there's one more thing. The information we have on Alvin Johnson kind of just starts around 2021.
Really?
It doesn't say whether he's still in prison or even if he's still alive.
Wow. Despite the brutality of his crimes and his connection to Jennings, he's sort of faded into obscurity. His story really highlights how even for individuals who have committed horrific acts, there can be these gaps in public records.
Yeah, it's almost like he's become a ghost, a whisper of a name in true crime history. But even though we don't know where he is, the impact of what he did, it lingers.
Absolutely.
Both for the victims and their families, but also for, our understanding of violence and the criminal justice system.
I think Alvin Johnson's case forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil, the complexities of human behavior, and the limitations of our justice system. It's a reminder that even with all of our advancement, some mysteries might never be solved.
Alvin Johnson's story has really been like a roller coaster of emotions, from his troubled past to his crimes and then just disappearing from the public eye. It's a case that really sticks with you.
It does. And if you're interested in exploring further, I encourage you to dive deeper into some of the topics we talked about today. Research the effects of childhood trauma, the challenges of rehabilitation, and the ethics of prosecution in cases where a perpetrator is already serving life.
That's great advice. Sometimes the cases that disturb us the most are the ones that teach us the most about ourselves and about the world we live in. So, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Alvin Johnson. Until next time, stay curious.